Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to a preview edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020, joining me to break down all of the round 17 action as Eels hit the road for a triple header against Newcastle Knights is my good mate, Sixties, and big fella. There's also maybe a little bit of an origin recap sprinkled in there as well, with the Blues having a sensational victory down in Melbourne.
Yes, mate. Hashtag Momax.
Yeah, hashtag Momax indeed. And I don't think about other combinations of those two names, but we'll go with Momax right now because the other one probably sums up Parramatta's situation way too much right now.
Yeah, there is another hashtag that could easily be made out of the names, but we're just going to steer well clear of that. I did have a message about what that alternative is, so let's stick with the
Momax,
positive.
Yeah. And geez, Momax put on a show, and we'll get to that shortly. But before we do, as always, a quick shout out to the sponsors of the Tip Sheet, which is Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan, and Parramatta. They cover us for each and every episode, whether it's preview, review, or news and NRL podcast, and obviously this one being a preview pod, so thanks to Greg and the crew. Big fella, before we get into our triple header against the Newcastle Knights with the Flegg Cup and NRL in action at McDonald Jones Stadium on Saturday, let's do a bit of a recap of that Origin game where the Blues had to win to stay alive, and win they did, 38-18 over the Queensland Maroons. Martin, To'o with a double, Lomax with a double, Mitchell and Edwards scoring. Lomax with the kicking duties, with Mitchell Moses having a bung foot apparently, would not the way he played, kicking 5 from 7. Simbins for the Blues, Liam Martin the 50th minute. On the other side, Jeremiah Nene, Hamiso, Tabuai Fido, Murray Talangi all scoring tries. Valentine Holmes flawless off the tee. Pat Carrigan, Simbin the same minute as Liam Martin in one of the, I got to say that was pretty funny. And I understand why Ashley Klein did what he did after issuing the warning like literally 30 seconds before. That was one of the most like tame sim meetings I've ever seen. Oh goodness, but yeah,
it was. But do you know what?
Klein, you had to at that point you've got to make the sim bins, right? Because otherwise, why issue warnings ever?
Yeah, and I thought the decision, obviously he backed himself into the corner by the previous incidents and the warnings that he issued there. So my issue was why 12 minutes later, I think when the players had just gotten back on the field, wasn't caught a sin bin for trying to get in the face of Angus Crichton after Crichton forced an error for a huge hit on one of the other players. So weird inconsistency. I have a level of disappointment in Liam Martin in last night, because I thought the couple of incidents that he was involved in gave
opened up the second half of the Maroons, and obviously you want a player like Liam Martin redlining and really pushing the limits of what you can do, but he clearly overstepped there and was a little bit on tilt. Even with it wasn't like the negative on tilt where you're losing and you're spiraling, but he was on almost like a glut of power tilt, where they've had so much success upsetting the Queenslanders in that game that he tried to push and clearly went too far. And opened it wasn't like he opened the door for a wholesale comeback, but clearly the Maroons were the better team in the second half on the back of the string of penalties that the Blues gave them because of some of the stuff that Martin was doing.
Well, I'll tell you what he did. He didn't so much invite the Queenslanders in as he invited the referee in to the contest.
Good wave, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And you don't want to invite Ashley Klein into a contest, because I don't know that you can always predict what he's going to do. And my main criticism of Ashley Klein last night was him issuing the edict that he did prior to the sin binning when it is an Origin contest.
Yeah.
It's
normal game, completely understandable.
Yeah, and it's not that there are different rules that should apply to Origin. It's just that it's going to be a contest that fires up without really overstepping the mark, because a bit of push and shove is not something that you need to, I think, be overly concerned about, because how often does it ever escalate into a punch being thrown, or in the case of what we've seen recently with Reed Marnie, a headbutt that's and you can't really call it a headbutt these days. It's a lean forward and tap with the head. It's just the wrong look, really, when you see headbutts these days. It's not like the old Liverpool kids that the forwards like to dish out.
Where the actual application of a proper headbutt is very dangerous. The ones we see right now are real instigating stuff, aren't they? Like, I'm going to get in your face and like
that's it.
Rub my forehead against your nose or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an act of stupidity
these
days
exactly.
rather than an act of aggression. It's like it. So anyway, I as I said, I'm disappointed that Liam Martin invited the referee into the contest, because I thought it completely stripped any momentum that the Blues had. And I guess that second half scoreline is indicative of the fact that all of the momentum was taken away from the Blues, and it was reflected in the penalty count. So from that respect, a little bit disappointing. But you don't want the gloss taken off what was still a very good win. It was such an impressive performance from Mitch Moses.
If Rugby League Weekly was still around, or Rugby League Week, sorry, would this have been a very rare 10.0 or 10 out of 10 for them?
For Mitch Moses, or for Mitch Moses, I reckon he'd get a 9.5 on that.
I think they would have considered long and hard giving him a 10. I think the Blues overall quiet second half, even though he did make a play in the second half, Mitch, with his fourth try assist, I believe. The Blues quiet second half probably would have stymied his chances of a full-on 10 in this hypothetical, but one of the all-time. I mean, in a game where Dylan Edwards, Stephen Crichton, Parramatta's own Zac Lomax now coming to us next year, obviously, Angus Crichton, Payne Haas, Cam Murray, Isaiah Yeo off the interchange, they all had incredible games. Mitch Moses was on another level too, and that's, what we saw. And I was texting you last night, when we were talking about the game live. This was a legacy game for Mitchell Moses, and obviously the job's not done. He needs to go and help the Blues win Game 3, but to have this sort of game at this sort of level, it puts him in very rarefied company. I think 4 try assists equals an Origin record with that of Brad Fittler back in the year of 2000, going way back there now. God, that's so long ago. And he had 4 try assists, and I think a further 2 try involvements where he wasn't, getting credited with the direct try assist, but would set up the play a pass or 2 wider, as the initial fulcrum to the attacking movement. So, what a game! I mean, the quote unquote blemishes on his game, Sixties, was he ran the ball in the red zone once and tripped over, and he ran the ball down a short side and just got caught and managed to get the ball away. Aside from that, he dominated Tom Dearden in defense, forced 2 errors in defense, kicked phenomenally in his clearing game, 4 try assists, those other try involvements. He was the engine for New South Wales, and to the team's credit, the forwards gave him a great platform. But the difference between him and some of the other options they've taken recently was stark, and it presents a really. Is Nathan Cleary going to be available for Game 3? The timeline on this, I'm a little bit unsure of, because I thought it was touch and go. But even if he is healthy, there is no way you can change that halves pairing, because Jerome Luai is you talk about those natural foils, don't you, 60s? He fry. I mean, you said at club level with Nathan Cleary, I understand this too. Like Moses and Cleary are very similar halfbacks in that regard, but he thrived out there with Mitchell Moses as he's 7. He looked like a free man. He was able to step in and do a lot of understudy kicking quite effectively, ran the ball with plenty of confidence, was linking up for Moses on the left with consistency. It looked like they've been playing together for years, to the point that I was expecting that they played touch football 10 years ago sort of article coming out today.
Yeah, I think that what we saw with Luai, and I guess to an extent we've seen something similar with him at the Panthers at the moment without Cleary, is that there was always this doubt on Luai about how much control he could have in a team. And I think that balance is tipping towards him having the capacity to lead a team around, because um, it just seemed to click in terms of the balance between him and Moses, because Luai was still able to have a certain level of control
Yeah,
over the
had
game.
a prominent part of the game plan, but was
Yeah,
not ever overcalling Mitchell. It was
that's right.
one of the most balanced for a representative, no club combination sort of spine. You throw on Dylan Edwards and Reece Robson, who, to Robson's credit, was happy to be third, fourth fiddle on this one and just distribute the ball and tackle his guts out, which is what you want from an Origin dummy half. But Edwards and Luai both got great looks by letting Mitchell run the show. No one tried to overplay their hand, overcall the halfback, and instead they all got spotlight moments regularly because of it. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and the thing was that when Moses hit the same side of the play as Luai, his role actually became to create more space
Yes,
for Luai.
to feature Jerome rather
Yeah,
than be the spotlight himself, and it worked so well. You could see 2 free defenders keying onto Moses in his option runner off his hip, and then creating that space for Luai and Edwards out the left. And we saw Latrell for a fantastic little flick pass to set up Brian To'o with one of his passes. It was just that first 40 minutes was some of the best football you'll ever see at any level. The Blues were just completely playing out of their minds.
yeah, and let's hope that we get a chance to see more of that in Game 3. I I think, as you were alluding to, that the likelihood that they'd go straight with like if Cleary comes back at club level between now and Game 3, or he declares that he's fit to play around the time of Game 3, I think the likelihood of them throwing him in the deep end for the decider when he hasn't played for so long would be minimal, and especially when you just had the halfback in Moses being the absolute standout
And
player of the match.
it's not even a case of me trying to protect Mitchell here, because you could easily go Moses at 5'8" and Cleary at halfback, and it would work just fine. But
Yeah.
as much as I've been a vocal critic of Jerome Luai's antics as a pest, the way we've been with Reid Marnie, he is definitely taking his game to another level at the State of Origin arena, and I don't see how you can drop him. He has been really good, and even in Game 1, he missed a lot of tackles. So did a lot of the Blues, but he was clearly making an impact with the ball in hand. So, yeah, Luai and Moses, great combination.
I want to touch on this quickly because you mentioned it before, and Joey Johns mentioned it in the call, which was the defence of Mitch Moses. Now, where I will take issue with Joey Johns is he talked about the fact that the defence was something that Moses had been criticised for. That is a long time ago.
We're
Mitch
talking
Moses
a better part of a
has
decade.
Mitch Moses has for a long, long time, and in that read, basically since he's been at Parramatta, been a very good defensive halfback. Now, he might get credited with some misses, but the misses that he makes are either A, he's not going to play her off their feet, or B, it's where he's absolutely thrown himself at someone where there's a minimal chance of making the tackle, and he gets credited with a miss. Like I think there was one where last night where he would have been credited with a miss where the hammer was flying across field and he threw himself at the feet of the hammer to try and get him off balance, and was beaten there, and so that goes down as a missed tackle. But what was seen last night was the number of occasions where he can make the one-on-one tackle, and when you're defending out wider as a half or a centre, you are faced with a lot of one-on-one tackles, and I don't have the fear of at any stage that someone's running at Moses, he's going to miss them.
No,
because
you know he's going to
I
put
am
his
always
body.
confident there is going to be contact.
Yeah, he's going to put his body front on and slow him down at the very least.
Yeah, and that's one thing that look. I think I know how much Mitch Moses credits BA with being able to take him to another level as a player. But one of the absolute standout areas has been in defence. Now, that has never, ever been something where Moses was ever a reluctant defender. Even when he was at the Tigers and when he first came to Parramatta, the one thing that he always possessed was the bravery to put himself in front of a defender. But what he's managed to do in his time at Parramatta is to get that technique and timing down pat. And he is a very good defensive halfback. And as we just suggested, that's been for some time. He's been a very, very good.
And I think part of the reason Mitch probably doesn't get his flowers when it comes to how good he is defensively as a halfback, and he is one of the better halfbacks or halves in general. Defensively is the fact that he probably plays along an all-time defensive half in Dylan Brown, and a lot of that spotlight gets stolen by Dill because Dill could literally defend pretty much any position in the game and do a great job. So yeah, well done to Mitchell, man of the match in this game. 4 try assists, 2 more try involvements, a ton of big plays on both sides of the ball, and spearheading a group of Blues that played out of their minds, including future Eel Zac Lomax, who had to get his knee drained to play this 160s. If you saw him in the post game, he was hobbling a bit of a knee injury there, so he played tough. And on the other side, the Hammer getting needled up during the game for a shoulder injury, also playing tough and scoring a try. So the Blues will now head up to Queensland for the Game 3 decider, where they do not have a very good record historically. I think it's like one win they've managed to produce in these circumstances in the history of the game. So they've got to get it all done in 3 weeks' time with Mitchell Moses at the helm again, and we'll be right there to preview. And we'll talk about this quickly again on Tuesday with Quint, so let him have his say about the wrap-up here. But anything else you want to say before we move on, mate?
No, I only just wanted to quickly address the growing rumours about Kailiro to the Eels. I don't know that there's any basis to it. You and I have banged on a lot about Kailiro.
Jarrell Skelton and Kailiro for last year and a bit, easily.
Yeah. I mean, we know that there are players, backline players that have been in the Sharks team that we've liked, Stone Street, Iro.
Yep, Stone Street's another good one.
Yep. So there's been players that when we've looked at, okay, well, how can the Eels bolster their speed in their backs, certainly at the very least the depth, but genuine first grade options. We've gone straight to the Sharks as an immediate source that he'd chase this player, chase that player, and I'd love to see Kailiro at the Eels, but I don't know that there's anything to that rumour. Hope we're wrong. Hope I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where you like to be pleasantly surprised, but we've had a coach installed. It's always going to be difficult for the Eels to recruit, and given that we've got a couple options there in Riles, Hannay, and if you believe the rumours, Young potentially. Until that gets sorted, it is difficult to see the Eels making retentions, let alone making recruitments. So
look, I'd like to see all that sorted in 2 to 3 weeks of coaching. I think it will be sorted in that sort of time frame. But let's see. It's as you said on our news podcast, like you want due diligence in finding the next coach. So it's a matter of having that balance of getting it done within a reasonable time frame, but also getting the due diligence right, making the correct decision, because we don't want to go through a period of the rotating chairs from as far as coaches are concerned. We've done that in the past with the Eels. We don't want to go down that path again. We'd like the next coaching appointment to be again after we've come out of a long period with BA, that if we make the right coaching decision, we can have a solid period of time under a coach, because I think there's going to be a certain amount of rebuild, reshaping, of the roster, and I think we again want some consistency of the coach rather than going through maybe making the wrong choice and then having a change of coaches 2 years down the track and then more reshaping, rebuilding. Let's get it right. As long as we get it right first time, we can move forward.
Well said, mate. And speaking of moving forwards, let's get into the previews for Saturday. As we said earlier, triple header against the Newcastle Knights. Novocastrians hosting the Parramatta Eels in round 17. And
by the way, how jealous are you of 3 grades of football?
It's been a long time. It's been a long
venue?
time. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I love to see that. I mean, it's enjoyable when you get a couple of grades on the same day. And we had the double header of lower grades, although the unfortunately the New South Wales Cup didn't deliver in any way, shape, or form last week. But it was good to have a double header of lower grades on at Granville Park. So 3 grades, man, that's like some good old time rugby league that the Novocastrians are getting to enjoy this week.
Yeah, it's a good value for your season tickets or your individual tickets if you're buying them for this one game. And would like to see it happen more at CommBank, but it feels like the stars just do not align now for the Parramatta Eels when it comes to these sort of schedules. So the Eels will kick things off at 1:15 p.m. in the Jersey Flegg, looking to back up from a very narrow loss to the competition leaders in the Canberra Raiders. And they take the field against the Newcastle Knights looking like this. Arpa Twaddle goes back to fullback this week. And they got in the back three alongside him Muhammad Alamuddin and Bo Newlands. Devonta Ovella steps into the centres this week for Antioch Faitala Mariner with Faraz Nanva as the other centre free quarter. In the halves, Matty Hunter will partner Joshua Lynn. Front row sees Sam Tuivasa and Tinkin Brown as the 2 props, Rowie Smith at dummy half. Will Lewis, Raf Destratus on the edges, Dom Destratus at lock forward. So the Eels going a little bit lighter in the back row this week due to promotions in the Cup, but I think they're going to be pretty effective still. On the interchange, you've got Yaya Ayachi, Tyrese Lakeni, Javan Stevenson-Halla making his Flegg debut for the Parramatta Eels, one of the SG Ball graduates there, with Damascus Nemia rounding out their rotation. Zach Hunter is the 18th man. Looking at these 2 teams, 60s, the Knights are in 3rd place, 9 wins, 1 draw, 5 losses. Obviously doing very well in the season. Eels down in 11th, 6 wins, 9 losses. Would have loved to have had that win against the Raiders. Would have kept them 2 wins behind the top 6. As it stands now, they're going to need a lot of wins and some results, I think. But got to get it done this week against the 3rd place Knights. And looking at that Knights team, I know that Connor Vitano was part of the New South Wales 19 setup that Matt Arthur captained. Anyone else there that I recognise? Malachi Smith I've seen in the past. Jermaine McEwen, another 19s rep there. I think he was a 2-time rep as well, like Sam Tuivasa. He played last year and this year. So obviously a very seasoned play there. Miles Martin, we're obviously very familiar with, 60s. He's not long for the Newcastle Knights, having signed with the Canberra Raiders, but going to be a roadblock in the meantime for the Eels on the weekend. And then, look at that. It's a pretty good Knights team. You can see why they're up there at the top of the table. Be a lot of those SG ball players that we saw last year as well that were part of a very good Newcastle team in last couple of seasons for the junior reps. Can the Eels get this one done? Can you bounce back from a heartbreaking loss against the competition leaders, one that maybe sets you back a game too far to get to the finals?
Yeah, it was a heartbreaking loss last week. It was a combination of bad luck and not seizing opportunities. So whilst the Eels were, I think, clearly the better team in the loss to the Raiders, you have to say well done to the Raiders for getting the job done when they weren't the better team. And I guess the Eels had their fate in their own hands and didn't grasp a couple of opportunities when they came their way and pay the penalty for it. So as long as they keep their heads up, use it as the disappointment still as a motivator that they can get the job done against the higher placed teams, because I think when they played the Raiders earlier in the season, they weren't really in the contest from memory. But this one, that they had deserved to win it. Now, looking at the team, there's obviously, you mentioned the changes. They are very much a lighter weight, more mobile pack taking the field. And to an extent, I guess that's the pattern in the game, isn't it? That you're moving towards that with the faster game. Look, the Destratus boys, I never have, like, anytime they're named in a team, I know what the team's going to get. They're going to get like 100% effort from both of them. They are real tough, genuine competitors. Good to see Will Lewis getting a run again. He's had a tough time with injury, I think, this year. Certainly was at the start of the year, missed some time there. We're seeing and just looking at the bench, seeing Tyrese Lakini and Javan Stevenson-Huller getting that call up from the SG Ball side. Now, Tyrese has already had some time in the team, but this is Javan's debut game. I'd like to see a bit more time given to Josiah Funai-Uta. That was one of the things.
Yeah, Josiah is a big one, and then I think in the backs, Dom Ferrugia is probably the other one you're looking for. And there's like other options there too. You know, Lockie Konakis is a utility. If there's a spot in the halves, maybe Lorenzo Talatona. You know, a number of other guys that could be in the mix as well. But right now, I think they're the two priority ones from the forwards and the backs.
Yeah, and you got to you have to find that balance of giving opportunity as well as you know, if there's blokes there that are doing the job, and obviously with the Flegg team are still young players themselves, then you know you're not throwing them under a bus whilst giving someone else an opportunity. It's a matter of finding that balance of blooding players while still keeping the core of the team. So, but you also do create opportunities in this team in giving players a shot up in New South Wales Cup. And we've seen that, as you mentioned, with a couple of the players that have been elevated to New South Wales Cup. Then that brings in players into the team, especially in the forwards this week. But so to that end, I think we'd like to see Mohamed Alamuddin getting a bit of game time in New South Wales Cup. Now, he's someone who was playing SG ball earlier this year, so we're actually advocating that he moves up 2 grades within the same year. But that did happen as well towards the end of last year with some players. So, it's him getting some game time there. People asked, why didn't I straight out mention ARPA for the as a suggested inclusion or for time in New South Wales Cup this year. I'm not opposed to that either. But what I was looking at was the fact that Josh Lynn is the player who seems to be alternating between Jersey Flegg and New South Wales Cup. And that would be where I'd see ARPA getting time in that 5'8" position.
Yeah.
In New South Wales Cup. And I think next year, you know, maybe the club can look at, with Ethan Sanders moving on, Josh Lynn and ARPA Twiddle even pairing at New South Wales Cup level. So, because I think ARPA's shown a lot more at 5'8" than I'd seen at fullback, and that's not being overly critical of his work at fullback. But I just see a lot of upside to him playing in the halves.
Yeah, I think that he's taken that transition to 5'8" like really in stride, and if anything, it's played to his strengths that we saw at fullback, and maybe even enhanced him in that positional transition. So I agree. He definitely needs a look at some point in Cup. You know, later in the year, you might make a pragmatic decision too. If Ethan Sanders, you know, is in the future at Parramatta, then maybe you give Lynn and Twiddle a look in the back end of the season, perhaps, depending on, you know, where the team is in terms of hunting for that final spot. But yeah, keen to see this team. Well, we don't get to see them this week, Sixties, because they're down in Newcastle, or up in Newcastle, as it were, geographically. But this is a big test for them. Newcastle third place. We obviously know that they can hang with the good teams because they just pushed the best team in the competition to a 2-point loss where they had a chance to kick a couple of goals and score a try to take the win. So, yeah, they got to back up this one and find a way to do that. And that takes us to our predictions here. Do you think they can, or is the home field advantage of the third place team in the competition too much of a gap?
Look, it's going to be a tough ask, but I would draw something out of last week and say that the team did exceptionally well without winning against the Raiders. And I think if they can carry a similar form into this week's game, but ice the opportunities that they get when they're presented, that they can get the job done. Now, I haven't seen a huge amount of Newcastle as a team this year, but based on what Parramatta's delivering and based on the consistency of their form over the last 7-8 weeks, they're in there with a show, and I'll tip them to win narrowly in this game.
Yeah, I think the Knights probably prevail here. Just that combination of home field advantage alongside their good roster, and the fact that the Eels are probably a little bit down on trips this week just because of the decisions made to promote players, which I'm not. This is not me being upset about. I like the call to put Brazel and Pryke into Cup, but it'll be, if they win, they're going to have to do it tough. They're going to have to play really good football and beat a good team. So this is one of those ones. Head says Knights, heart says Eels. So let's go off the heart.
Yeah. Okay.
And on to the New South Wales Cup, and thankfully for fans of the Blue and Gold, you can catch this one on New South Wales Rugby League TV, and it's been, if I get my tabs right, broadcast from a 3 o'clock p.m. kickoff with the 10th place Eels taking on the 9th place Newcastle Knights at McDonald Jones Stadium. Eels look like this, with Zach Senior at fullback, Mulatalo and Lumi on the wings, Jake Tunnell and Morgan Harper in the centres. Dejan Arce drops back to this grade to play 5/8. Ethan Sanders will partner him in the halves. Luca Moretti, Joey Lussick, and Wideramu Greg are the 8 to 10 in the front row. Dan Keir captains the team on one of the edges, of Charlie Geimer showing that back row versatility, sliding from lock to edge this week. And he'll be on the opposite side of the field, of course. Brock Parker getting another start at lock forward. On the interchange, Manny Luke is the dummy half rotation player, with Jock Brazel and Saxon Pryke coming up from the Flegg to the Cup. Get my competitions right there. To be bolstering the interchange, with Reece Alderton rounding out the rotational positions on that 4-man bench. Taking on the Newcastle Knights, who have a couple of players you might recognise. 60s David Armstrong made a bit of a name for himself earlier this year, deputising Kalen Ponga before he was usurped by young Sharp, who's playing in the NRL team. Tom Jenkins from the Panthers, solid player in the back line there. Christian Mapapalangi, I believe, was he Manly originally? I think he might have been Manly. Then you've got Jack Cogger, a bit of NRL experience there. Absolute wild card in Jack Havington, could have a game that is won or lost on the basis of the plays he makes or the insane plays he does. Very good player when he's locked in, but can be a bit volatile. And then Jacob Davis on the interchange, having his second cap in the Cup this year for the Knights. Knight turned Eel turned Knight. So he's back where he started, working as the dummy half off the interchange there.
And their position on the ladder, mate?
They are same amount of wins as the Parramatta Eels, slightly better for and against, only slightly. So if the Eels want to make a charge up the ladder, this is one you got to have. They botched against the Raiders last week. Went down 30-0, and I don't think the scoreline actually reflects the amount of opportunities the Eels had to make that a contest and even a win. It was 18-0 until the 72nd minute, with the Eels having so many red zone opportunities that they botched last week. They can't. The conditions won't be as bad this week, knock on wood, but they can't have that as a repeat. Their completion rates were, I think, 48% against the Raiders, and that felt generous based on what we saw. They need to bump that up by at least 30 points. Get it close to 80%, and then they can get back to their winning ways. Although, in saying that, one of the big omissions last week due to State of Origin and 19s format was no Matt Arthur, and that made a big difference to the team. Even putting a vet like Joey Lussick in there, who will tackle his backside off and steer the team around the park. It was a different tempo, and they're going to have to deal with that again this week with no Matt Arthur. And it'll be very interesting to see with Dejan Arce back, but no Matt Arthur, where his team is at from that sort of tempo engine, opportunity identification sort of perspective.
Yeah, that I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that was genuinely one of the worst games of football I've seen last week. And those who would have been viewing it at home, and that is far more people that were at the ground, I can tell you it was very sparse. The crowd down at Eric Tweedale Stadium, there was plenty of room down there, even in the stand, for anyone that would have wanted to come to watch the game, because the conditions were bleak. It was wet, it was cold, and the game felt like it lasted for days rather than the 80 minutes. It was just an absolute bludger of the highest order. You mentioned that the Eels had opportunities to be in the game. I mean, there was no scoring at all in the first 30 minutes. And that's because the Raiders were as bad as the Eels with their completions in that early part. But then the Eels said, "Oh, you think you're bad with completions? Hold my beer."
It's very much a hold my beer moment in the worst kind of way.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can't afford a repeat, not even a repeat performance, but anything in the neighbourhood, the postcode of a repeat performance. That's how bad it was. They're going to.
I think there were players in that Eels team who had almost, this is probably the wrong way of terming it, but career-defining bad games.
Yeah, they
It was
set the bar
like,
as low as it's ever going to go.
yeah, that's in all honesty, and I'm sure they're not going to disagree with it. Some of the players that they would have come close to having the worst game of their career, and combined with so many of them having the worst game that I've ever seen them play, it just made for, as I said, the worst game of football I think I've ever seen. It was just, and it just went on forever, mate. It just went on and on and
The
on.
game did drag on a long time.
Oh my
At
God!
one point in the second half, I was like, "How is there still 25 minutes left? How?"
Yeah, and even with you doing the call of the New South Wales Cup, I thought to myself, this gives me an opportunity to leave early. I should leave early. Then I thought, oh, that's not in my nature to leave early. But damn, if ever there was a game where I was ready to walk out after 15, 20 minutes of the second half, well, I was ready to walk out after half time, to be honest. But yeah, it felt like it. So number one, we're not going to see individually the players play as poorly as they did last week. It is an actual impossibility. If it was possible, then they would be finding some depths that they wouldn't have ever thought that was possible out of their own games. They will play better individually. Whether they can perform as a team to the level that they had been performing at before, that remains to be seen. And you mentioned the out of Matt Arthur, and that look, so much direction is provided from him at dummy half, and I'm not sure how much it's understood how much he provides from that dummy half position, but it really, the way that, first of all, in the most simple terms, he gets the forwards on the front foot. He gets the yardage work, even from the back five on the front foot. It's and that's a tough job, considering that you have the halfbacks generally jumping in the early part of the tackle count when they're in yardage. But it's whether it's in there deep in their own half or on the attack, and especially the choice of being able, when to go blindside play, when to go open side. It's just, and the thing is, he's got such experience with Ethan Sanders in the halves that Ethan, I think, plays his best football off Budsy, and because Ethan reads Buds and knows, like they have a really good synchronicity in when the player's on. They've got the really good communication between the two of them, and you can bet even if the communication's not happening, they know and understand each other's play, and it means so much. Now, then you've also got, because the spine has been functioning really well because on top of that, Josh Lynn has been there, and he's also has that good understanding with Woods and with Ethan because the three of them have been together. And you've got Zac playing his best football at fullback. And without question, he's been one of the most consistent performers in New South Wales Cup. Because, to me, his best position is fullback. Now, will he ever be a first-grade fullback? I don't know. But he's certainly more than capable at New South Wales Cup level. In fact, he's very, very good at New South Wales Cup level at fullback. And he invariably beats the first one or two defenders when he's carrying the football because he refuses to be tackled. So we saw that when he's playing in the outside back, sometimes he just struggles with making the right defensive decision.
Yep.
But at fullback, that's taken away. And who knows? I mean, he might actually become a better outside back through playing at fullback because he's having to make the defensive calls for the people in front of him and direct players around. So he may be learning himself a little bit more defensively through being at fullback. But look, they've got whether they can counter missing Budsy this week remains to be seen. I guess at a pinch, I'll say if they get the job done, they'll get it done narrowly. And after last week, I need to see that they can bounce back before I can call them as winners this week. So, forced to select, I'd probably say the Knights get this done. Just simply because after last week, I can't tip Parramatta this week. I have to see them bounce back, from what they dished up the week before. So, what about you?
Yeah, this is going to be a defining game for them. After dropping the bundle massively against the Raiders last week, they now get a winnable game against a sort of contemporary in the ladder in the Newcastle Knights with the same amount of wins. No Matt Alpha is going to be big. No Matt Dury is going to be big. Two of the informed players for the huge stretch of their resurgence in the mid-season. And if they get it done, I'll have a lot of confidence in them to not necessarily make the finals, but the fact they're going to have a real dig in the back end of the season. But going to have to wait and see, but I'll buy into them. I'll believe in them. So Eels to win in a tough one.
Is it a big positive for you as well that you've got Charlie Geimer, Brock Parker, Jock Brazel, Saxon Pry?
This is exactly what we were talking about. 60s was that obviously you're still trying to chase the finals. Don't get me wrong. But you got to be doing it while cultivating the guys that are going to be building blocks for the next year and beyond. And given, again, that the Eels are going to struggle to recruit for next year, they're getting a coach very late in the process. And this isn't, again, not me complaining. This is just the facts as they are presented, that the Eels are going to struggle for recruitment next year. They need to be having the internal side of things kicked into a high gear now. They need these guys, as NRL ready as you're going to get them this year. And that's not to say they're going to be NRL ready, but as NRL ready as possible. And that means getting guys like Pryke and Brazel time in the New South Wales Cup. It means getting guys like Alameddine up into the New South Wales Cup. It means getting guys like we talked about with Josiah and Dom from the SG Ball, getting them into Flegg, which then opens up chances for guys to come up to Cup like Alameddine. So start getting that done. And what we see this week is good. I have no complaints about seeing Jock and Saxon on the interchange, seeing Brock and Charlie starting in the back row. Love it. Love it. Even if we lose, it is 100% the right sort of decision-making.
Yep, absolutely.
So Eels on a tight one for me, backing the boys in blue and gold there. Takes us to the main event, 5:30 p.m. kickoff. Only 2 games on the Super Saturday on Fox Sports this weekend. It's a triple header on Sunday. So Eels kicking off the Saturday proceedings with a game against the Newcastle Knights. Pretty close on the betting line here. Newcastle 187, Parramatta 197. Eels named like this. Actually, I'll go by the Knights first. NRL, we do the other team as well. Young Fletcher Sharp at fullback. You got Tuala and Marzu on the flanks. Gagai and Best rounding out a pretty solid back line. No Kalimpong, obviously, but still plenty of strike there between Gagai and Best and Marzu. In the halves, you got another debutant, Will Price, 21-year-old Englishman. He's a bit of backline utility, making his debut at 5'8". He'll partner Jackson Hastings in the halves. Jacob Saifidi, Leo Thompson, the bookends. Phoenix Crossland, the dummy half. Tyson Frizzell captains the team from the back row. Dylan Lucas on the other edge. Adam Elliott, big ball and muscle in the middle there. He'll be the lock forward. Jaden Brayley is the interchange dummy half alongside Daniel Saifidi, Kai Pierce-Paul and Brodie Jones as their rotational forwards. Extend the roster, Croker, Heverington, Cogger, Mapapalangi and Armstrong. So not a bad team for Newcastle Knights. Their ladder position is 12th coming into this one with, if I just check their win column, 6 wins. 6 wins, 8 losses. So they're floating about the pack hunting down the 8, but they are a win behind the Dragons, Raiders and Sea Eagles. Sea Eagles have 7.5 wins. Oh, so there's buys in play here. So on a pure win basis, Manly have the ascendancy there from those teams right now. But they're a decent team. They can certainly score points. But this is a roster the Eels can beat. And in order to do it, they look like this 60s with Guffo capping the team from fullback. Mike Acevo, we believe, is back proper this week. He'll be on the left flank, which allows Blaze Talangi to play right wing alongside Will Penasini at right centre. Sean Russell partnering Micah on the left in the centres there. Then you have Dylan Brown and Mitchell Moses, who we expect will back up from State of Origin. He seemed to be pretty good in the post-game press conference that he had. Well, not press conference, but interview he had for Man of the Match. Didn't make any noise about the foot or being injured, so we expect him to back up. Front row sees Reg and Junior starting, Brendan Hands at dummy half, Lane and Cartwright on the edges, Joe Ofangahi at lock forward. No Jermaine Hopgood this week, 60s. And I believe there was some talk, it might have been on the radio, that he's looking at surgery, which would shut him down for 12 weeks. So that's definitely something to monitor there because that puts him out for the rest of the season. On the interchange, the big news, Matthew Arthur making his NRL debut as Eel 846, and he's going to be working alongside Brendan Hands, obviously in the dummy half position. On the interchange, joining him is Makasi Makatoa. Matt Doorey making his NRL debut for the season, or seasonal debut, after a good campaign in the Cup, with Ryan Madison rounding out the interchange. RC Lussick, Greg Tungor and Geimer on the extended roster there. Of note is Tungor and Geimer getting their first looks as part of that extended bench. And I don't think we're going to see Jake play this year, but Charlie's probably in the mix for a debut down the road, which is good to see Trent Barrett, again, kicking the tyres on what we can do internally to better prepare the Eels for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think I'm confident we go, providing Moses pulls up okay, I'm confident that we go 1-17 this week. I don't think there'll be any late changes in any way. So, people are suggesting that Charlie's going to get a late start, a late call.
I don't see. Why would you play the mind games if you're just naming Matt Arthur to play? You would have Charlie you would afford Charlie the respect to celebrate his debut, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I don't, anyone that's been, because I've had a few people have been messaging me and suggesting that that's likely to happen, and I'm just going to put it out there that no, I don't see that happening. I think they'll be 1-17 with this. Well, I'm confident they'll be 1-17 with this. Now, just looking at and you were talking then about Jermaine Hopgood. When we came into this season, and we were like so hopeful that we wouldn't go through what we went through last year in terms of the key injuries and key absences, because we had players out last year that we just couldn't afford to have out. And now, as it turns out, the players who will have the majority of weeks absent this year will include, and mind you, Bailey Simonson's a significant out for the season in this regard. But if you were to nominate before the season started, which 3 players would you be fearful of losing for significant periods? You'd say Moses, Gutherson, Hopgood. And bingo, there they are.
Yeah. It's...
And that's, and in me saying that, I'm, obviously Dylan Brown would be included in that, but he had his time out last year. No, and it wasn't for injury. So, I was confident that he'd get through this season. But yeah, those three, poof, like
It's a
couldn't
pretty
have
big
had
handicap. It's a pretty big
Oh,
handicap. Yeah.
and look, every team has injuries, and this is not meant as an excuse because we haven't, we've failed to take opportunities to win games, and B had some games where it looked like the players didn't turn up, and by that I mean the Dolphins and Storm games, right? So we haven't performed as we should have, and in fact, in many instances, nowhere near it. That's why the Eels are sitting where they are on the ladder right now. But I thought last year was a horror of a year for player absences and significant player absences. This year, it's almost absurd the who those players are that are missing this year. So anyway, now just to this game specifically, the Knights. Here's where I feel confident in playing the Knights. I mean, besides the fact that their form has fluctuated this year, there isn't a player in that team who I feel has the level of explosive elite speed that would trouble us in that respect, because we obviously don't possess that. So as soon as we're playing against a team, if it contains the hammer or and or as in like Manly with Saab, anywhere where there is someone with elite pace, I always get concerned about what can happen with a potential overlap that's created when the ball gets thrown inside their own half. I look at this Newcastle team, and look, I'm not saying they're not fast, but I don't think there's that level of elite pace. So if this Newcastle team was, say, as good as Penrith are overall, I would have the same regard for them as what I do when we play Penrith, in that every time we play Penrith, I think we're in with a chance of winning. And the thing is, they're not as good as Penrith. So I look at this Newcastle team and I go, this is an eminently winnable game.
Yep.
Regardless of how we're going. If we're taking the field 1-17, which I believe we will, then I believe that the team that we're putting out there, even with the absence of Jermaine Hopgood, can get the job done. Because I think at the very least, we are close to matching them when it comes to pace. And I think we've got the skill set within the team to get the job done. Because I look at the spine, and I think we've well and truly got the edge as far as the spine is concerned. I look at the respective packs, and I think they've got a couple of older forwards at the in the Knights. Look, there's blokes there that I've got a lot of time for. Leo Thompson, I think, so
He's come on nicely. Yeah, he's starting to
yeah.
really develop into a good first grader. Greg Marge is obviously damaging as a ruck option and a wrecking ball near the line. Bradman Best and Dane Gagai, it's a good centre pairing. They've got good players across the park, but they don't. I can understand what you're saying. You're saying they don't have the sort of players that should, in a bubble, in a vacuum, really trouble the Eels in a neutral matchup.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like and I keep coming back to this question of pace. See, I always think that we're a chance against the Panthers because the Panthers don't threaten us when it comes to elite pace. The Panthers are an exceptional football team as a unit, because of the systems that they play, the way they combine, and obviously they have some elite talent that's there, but they're not a team that is going to shred the Eels in terms of okay, they get the ball out to the back line and then we get run around. That's not how the Panthers line up against the Eels. And I think, and I'm not making a comparison and saying the Knights are the Panthers in that regard. What I'm saying is, like the Panthers, I don't believe that the Knights have that elite pace that threatens the Eels. Therefore, it becomes a question of what are their systems like? What are their combinations like? Are there individual strike players that we have to be concerned about in terms of their ability to beat a tackle or to put on a play? And they don't. I'd respect them, but I think the Eels are also, at the very least, a match for them. And the Knights don't have a Mitchell Moses in their team. The Knights don't have a Dylan Brown in their team. The Knights don't have a Reg or a Junior at their best in their team. And if Reg and Junior turn up at their best, the Knights don't have players that are the equal of them. So it's and Gutho, if he's not too banged up, he is going to still be an important contributor to the Eels team. I like the fact that we've got Matt Dury included on the bench.
He'll rotate with Sean Lane, you'd think, right? Down that left edge.
And the thing is, Matt Dury, he just runs really good attacking lines.
Yeah.
And he will ask questions with every carry that he makes. And that's a look, Kelmer can do that as well, but Kelmer hasn't quite learned to run some of the lines that Matt Dury does. He's just really hard to bring down, Matt. Hopefully Matto can be at his best. And of course, we can't talk about this without mentioning the debut of Matt Arthur. We know what he's going to bring to the team in terms of the attacking threat, the way he reads the game, the way he'll bring players onto the ball, keep taking them forward. So how much time do you think he's likely to get?
Big question, isn't it, coming out of this one? Brendan Hands has shown he can play the full 80, even though the wear and tear will get to him on the course of a longer season. I think the sweet spot's somewhere between 15 to 25 minutes. I don't know where the metronome's going to fall on the left or right of that scale, but if he's feeling himself and he's playing good football, maybe Trent lets him go for a bit longer. But you got to think at least 15 minutes to let him, really get his more than his feet wet and start immersing himself in what it is to be a first grade footballer.
Yeah, I think maybe what they might be looking at is a stint either side of half time.
Be more than happy with that. Yeah, I think that's a good tempo. Based on the ebb and flow of a normal NRL game, that'd be a good time to get him into the game tempo-wise.
Yeah, and then when you're talking about how long he stays there, I guess, then it depends on how the team is going and how he's performing individually with the different tempo of NRL football, about whether that time after half time is a longer period or a shorter period. But who knows? He might only plan to introduce him for 15 minutes in the second half, like midway through the second half or after 10 minutes into the second half. You don't know, because that might also be determined by how Brendan Hands is going as well. So if his tempo remains strong, then it may well be that he's waiting for a time in the game to introduce Budsy there. So look, it is an interesting question, but we're certainly pleased that he's getting this opportunity now, because I think it's probably not just the ideal in terms of where the Eels are on the ladder and what's happening with the season, but I think it's also probably the ideal game, because it's the Knights being the team that they are, and where they're sitting on the ladder and a little bit of inconsistent performance, I don't think I don't think Woods was ever going to be overwhelmed by any situation at all. But I think if you're picking a game to introduce Woods to first grade, this is probably a good week to do it.
And he's cresting high on that wave of momentum from obviously playing well in Cup to spearheading a State of Origin win in the under-19s for the Blues into making his first grade debut. Like just the timing feels right.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, look, and I think you're going to find that he'll be quite confident out there in his time out on the field. He's been building for this for a long time. He's been around the first grade team basically for as long as Brad's been the coach. So the players know him well already. So it's not like it's not like he's someone that they've had to get around and embrace in the first grade team. He was already embraced by the squad anyway. So and look, I'm not talking out of school here in saying he had an exceptionally good preseason. Like he was asking lots of questions in the opposed sessions during the preseason. They know what he'll bring to the team, and I think although I said he's well known to the team, I still think even so that it'll bring some excitement to the team as well, that he's out there with them. So, really looking forward to it from that regard. Anything about the way you think this game is likely to play out, John, in terms of how the Knights will play the game, how Eels will play the game?
Well, it feels like historically Newcastle always been a real form in the side team for the Parramatta Eels, but I think the last couple of encounters have seen the Eels winning pretty handsomely. So maybe there's been a bit of a change in that trend, and maybe this will be a favourable matchup for Parramatta Eels. And I know Mitchell Moses backing up a legacy game in State of Origin. Maybe he makes it a legacy week. Big game for a couple of Parramatta Eels here potentially. And I don't know. Obviously, I'm not going into any given game this year now and saying, the Parramatta Eels are going to smash them, but this feels like a very winnable game. Like Newcastle may end up winning, don't get me wrong, but, we have Mike Casebo back in our back line, and it feels so weird to say it given all the legitimate gripes that we've had about the consistency of his level of play in recent months and seasons, but that is a sight for sore eyes. Like, that is a big in for the Parramatta Eels.
It is. We've spoken before about what Sevo at his best brings to the team, and also what Sevo regularly brings to the team, and it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
But it means no Dejan Arce in the centres up against Dane Gagai or Bradman Best. I think it'll be Dane Gagai in this hypothetical because Best matches up against Will Penasini in the past at least. So that's a big win for the Parramatta Eels there. I mean, Sean Russell's going to have his work cut out for him taking on Dane Gagai, who is the ageless old man out there carving up in year 34. I think he's that old now, and he's still killing it. But it just feels like a winnable game.
And can I just say, just on that, just on the back line, what the inclusion of Sevo does is it allows the back line to be balanced.
Yes, yeah, you got it.
And players not being not so much of an issue of players playing out of position or in positions that they're not suited to. I mean, maybe you can argue that Blaze is out of position on the wing,
but one position in a back line that has been compromised by injuries and a lack of depth is perfectly acceptable. Having one guy maybe out of his preferred position. But when you had 2, 3, 4 guys, it felt like it's just, oh my goodness.
Yeah, so whilst Sevo's individual form hasn't been anything that is that you'd look at and go, oh, we miss what he brings in terms of his individual performance. what we miss when he's out is the balance in the team, and having, not having players being out of position and that sort of thing. So we need him in the team for that. And as we were always saying earlier this season, if you are looking at dropping a player based on form, you have to look at, have you got someone to come in that is going to do a better job? And unfortunately, when you've got a scenario where Bailey Simonson's out for the season, you don't have options. And even when we've got backup outside backs in the New South Wales Cup that are out for the season, like Hayes Dunster, like Arthur Miller-Stephen, like Richie Penasini, like Ethan Martin, it's a host of outside backs that aren't available this year. And I don't know whether Hayes is going to get back this year. I mean, he might get back this year. Richie Penasini might get back towards the end of the season. Ethan Martin might get back in 4 or 5 weeks. But the chances are those players, they're not going to play first grade.
No.
Well, it's not even the chances are. They won't be playing first grade. So, but again, that speaks to what's available in terms of first grade depth, and maybe that doesn't change too much next year, mate. But the thing is, at least with some of the younger players, they're a year older, a year more mature, a year more experienced. So they get closer to becoming genuine first grade depth options. But for now, we need Sivo back in the team.
Yep.
And we get that this week. In terms of how the game plays out, I mean, we're seeing a change in the game these days anyway, tactically, with all teams prepared to chance their hand in their own half. And more than any other season, the game seems to be faster because of that. But what we saw last night in Origin is that value of having a good kicker who can kick to the corners. I mean, the high score, the high score line last night tells you how the game is played this year, because this is Origin. And when you get an Origin game with that sort of score line, that's telling you that, you've got teams that are going to chance their hand and chance it at each end of the field. But New South Wales had a very distinct advantage with the kicking game. And you look at this, and Hastings has a decent kicking game, but no one really gets too close to what Moses can bring in a game. That consistency of the depth kicking, the way he can just seem to land it just before the try line.
Yeah.
So if the Eels can not give away any silly penalties on the back, have a good kick chase, try and keep the Knights contained at their own end of the field, make sure that they're on guard with their compressed defence, that when the Knights inevitably look to spread the ball in their own half of the field, that they don't allow them to get around the outside of them. And again, this is important because as we learn, as Michael Butner said to us in that pre-game podcast recently, and if people haven't had a listen to it, please go back and have a listen to Michael Butner talking about defending out in the back line. You just don't let a player get around your outside with the slide defence. You always make it that if you're defending at centre in one of those outside positions, that you don't let a player get the outside of you. You are also always looking that you've got to trust that bloke on the inside. And, if you make a ball carrier come back inside you, trust the bloke on the inside to get that job done.
Yep.
Don't let them get the march on you on your outside. So basically that applies, and we've talked about it in the past, when things have fallen apart where there's been a huge amount of space out wide. Normally, someone on the inside just hasn't quite got that job done of sliding across as they should, and turning the players back on the inside rather than allowing them to get around the outside. So anyway, I think we're probably at the point of making our tips.
Yeah, shoot our shots. Let's go. Parramatta Eels v Newcastle Knights. What's the score? First try scorer, best on field. 60s. I'm going with Blaze Telling is my first try scorer. I like that right edge pairing with Will Penasini. They've got something cooking down there. Where are you feeling first points coming from for the Parramatta Eels?
Well, you mentioned that side of the field, so I'm going to go with Will Penasini.
Yep.
To get across, and I think Will doesn't mind taking his own option to get across the line. He backs himself more often than not, so I think he gets the first Eels try.
Yep. Now Parramatta Eels have got to win, right? So I've got to go for the Eels winning. I will go for a 26-18 victory. 8 points there for the Blue and Gold.
I think it's going to be higher scoring especially if we've got a dry track. I think we're looking at a score line something like 38-28 to the Eels.
So similar margin of difference, but you're going for not the exact same, but similar, and but going for high scoring. Best on field. It's hard to go past Mitchell Moses, and I usually don't try and indulge in the spine players because it's so easy to say they're going to be best on field, but given what we saw last night in State of Origin, and given how much the Eels need their halfback to stand up and almost drag them kicking and screaming to a win, it feels like at this point in time. Mitchell Moses best on field.
I'm going to go maybe slightly unexpected here. I'm going to go with Reg as best on field.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can see him making a statement in this game, and I just have the feeling he's going to be a little bit fired up in this. So, Reg to be my nominated best or predicted best on field. So I think that pretty much brings us to the end of our preview, mate.
Yes, indeed. And we'll wrap it up here. It's been a good chat about State of Origin Game 2, as well as obviously the triple header out of McDonald Jones Stadium. Before we do sign off, as always, another shout out to our sponsors and star partners, Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan and Parramatta. Thanks to Greg and the crew. 60s, I'm feeling a little confident. I'm feeling a little good, and maybe it'll be shattered on Saturday. But the vibes are going to be good with Matt Arthur making his debut. Who do you think presents his jersey, by the way? I know that Brad has already come out and said that he doesn't want to disrupt the game day proceedings by being in there and presenting the jersey, but who you got tagged or tipped as the giving Woods his first ever and one of the most important jerseys you'll ever get, his first ever NRL jersey?
Oh, look, I still think family will be involved, mate. So I don't see that. As far as Brad would be concerned, that'd be he'd be thinking as much about the rest of the playing.
Oh, he's making a very pragmatic call here. At his own expense for the sake of the team. He doesn't want to make the day about him. It's about Woods and the Eels. So I 100% respect that call. But it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, there's his mum, brother, grandpa. There's some options there if you want to go family, and maybe it'll be all of them. Maybe it'll be a great moment together.
Yeah, look, as I said, I think family will be involved in some respect. So, it'll be a good moment for Woods, without question. So, and look, the interesting thing would be if he had been making his debut next season, for example, and Brad was connected with another club, Brad wouldn't be able to be there anyway.
No.
So at some point, he's this was always going to happen, and that a jersey presentation would involve other people in the family other than his dad, and you know what, that makes it it's predictable that's going to be the case, and it's a rare scenario, isn't it, where a player could be presented a debut jersey by a person who happens to be both the father and the coach. So, it's look, I'm sure it'll be a good moment for Buds and for the family regardless. So, yeah. So, mate, thank you again for another fine podcast. Thank you to our listeners for the loyal support that we get. I really do appreciate the messages that people are sending to me. Don't forget as well, people, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, maybe questions that you'd like us to put to guests that we have on in our Parramatta Leagues Club appearances, send that through to us. So as soon as we know who the guest is going to be, we'll put that up on our socials so that you know who it's going to be and what questions you'd like us to ask. But yeah, again, if there's anything that you'd like us to dig into as a topic, let us know. You can reply on our socials. You can reply on this particular posting when the podcast goes up. Just let us know, and we'll be more than pleased to be talking on topics that you're interested in. So, John, again, thank you. Again, thank you to our listeners. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.